G'day, Chris here, and welcome back to the channel. We're up to the third and final video in my router table build, and this one is going to focus on dust collection, i.e. the vacuum box. Now I've heard it been told that the router table is one of the most dangerous tools in your arsenal, and I learnt this the hard way, and you'll find out why in the middle of the video. Having said that, it is a super versatile tool, and I've already used it multiple times, even in its half-built state, including to build itself, as you may have seen. Now, I am a novice when it comes to router tables, so I would appreciate any feedback you guys have on safety tips on how to make sure you keep your digits when using these things. Right, let's get into the build. Okay, so the start of this build is pretty simple. All we're making is an open top box big enough to enclose our router with a little bit of extra space so it's not too cramped. I start off by breaking some cheap ply down with my circular saw, and then I move over to the table saw to get all the sides of the box cut to size. When you have multiple pieces of the same dimension, like the size of a box, it's a good idea to cut them together without adjusting the fence. This will ensure they truly are identical. Now, with all the pieces of the box cut, I do a quick dry fit to ensure everything is cut to the right dimensions. Before we actually put the box together, there's a few things we need to do to the pieces first, starting with the main dust outlet. The main dust outlet will be located on the bottom of the box and will be for a 100mm or 4-inch dust hose. So I start by locating the center of the bottom and then mark a 100mm or 4-inch circle. Then, after drilling a pilot hole for the blade, I can roughly cut the circle with my jigsaw. I'm not being too neat here, as I'm going to use a router to clean up the hole next. To true up the hole, I get the same template I used to draw the original circle and screw it to the bottom. This will act as a guide for my router bit, and don't worry about the screw holes, they'll be covered by the dust chute eventually. Now, this is the shot I wish I could show you. Me using the router table to flush trim the hole with everything going swimmingly. But this isn't actually what happened first. Let's rewind. This is what really happened. What I think was the issue is that I was pushing the piece with the spin of the router instead of against it, forgetting that the router was upside down, and the bit just grabbed the piece and took it out of my hands. And as you can see, it snapped my practically brand new compression bit clean through. I do want to say that I am a novice when it comes to router tables, so if you have any pearls of wisdom, I'd really love to hear them in the comments below. Anyway, back to the build, and the last thing to be done to the bottom is to round over the edges of the hole with a trim router. Now onto the back panel, and all we have to do here is drill a hole large enough for the router's power cord to come through. And don't worry about this causing any leaks for the vacuum, we're going to deal with that later on. Now, because of the nature of a router table, there won't always be optimum airflow for the vacuum. So to help with that, we're going to make an adjustable airflow valve thingy to allow us to increase or decrease the airflow for the vacuum. So basically, we're going to drill some holes in the side and add a piece of wood to cover or uncover them. I opted to make a line of 20mm or 3/4 of an inch holes, spaced 10mm apart or roughly half an inch apart. And after measuring the centers of the holes, I drilled them out with a Forstner bit on the drill press. Then, using the same round over bit as before, I round over the edges of both sides of each hole. Now, I'm going to use pocket hole screws to put this together, and there's nothing too technical about drilling the holes, but two pieces of advice I will give is, first off, consider where you're drilling your holes so they aren't covered and don't interfere with any other part of the build. I ended up drilling some holes that were too close to the edge and got covered by the back panel. And secondly, remember to pre-drill your holes on the top to attach the box to the router table, as there will be a hole A lot harder to do once the box has been put together. And with our pocket holes drilled, we can start to put the box together. Now I've seen loads of videos of people just holding their pieces of wood together when screwing in their pocket screws. But every time I try this, my pieces always tend to wander, so I highly recommend clamping your pieces together before driving in the screws. For attaching the door, all I'm using is 3 simple butt hinges. I start off by laying them out evenly across the edge of the box and mark their positions. When I'm happy with their position, I use my router to cut a recess for each hinge, as I want the door to shut reasonably flush without too much of a gap. I can then lay the hinges back in place and, using a self-centering drill bit, drill the screw holes and screw the hinges to the carcass. Then, with the carcass on its side, I can repeat the process, screwing the hinges to the door. And one tip here, only screw in a few holes first. If you make a mistake, at least not all of the holes are wrong. So I don't have any door latches handy, but I do have some magnets, so I figured I'd use a few to keep the door shut. These are super simple to install. All you need to do is get a drill bit the same diameter as your magnet, and drill a recess for the magnets on both the carcass and the door, making sure the holes line up. Then all you need to do is super glue the magnets in place and voila, you've got a simple door catch. Oh, and pro tip, don't get the magnet poles mixed up or you'll have the opposite of a door latch. Now going back to our adjustable airflow valve thingy, we need to add the ability to open and close those holes at will. And to do so, we're going to make a slidey wooden open-close thingamajig. And yes, that's the technical name for it. Hopefully this will make more sense as you see me making it. But to begin with, I'm going to use a rabbet bit to cut a rabbet in a piece of MDF. The rabbet will be slightly deeper than half the size of the MDF, as we're going to cut the inverse rabbet on another strip of MDF so they can slide together freely. And it's right about here that I wish that my dust extraction was already working, because MDF is not fun to work with. Anyway, the first strip needs to be wide enough to be able to cover the vent holes, and we're going to cut a rabbet on both sides of it. This will essentially be the moving part that we'll use to control the airflow. Next up, we want 2 small strips with a single rabbet on each side. But I don't want to work with small strips of wood on the router table, so to save my fingers, I'm going to cut a dado in both sides of a single large piece of MDF, and then I'm going to trim off what I need on the table saw. I can then take the 2 single rabbet strips and trim them to the width of the vacuum box on the drop saw. I also trimmed the double rabbet strip to be slightly longer than all of the vent holes, which is roughly half the width of the vacuum box. Now with all the pieces of the vent thingy made, hopefully it's starting to make a bit more sense. The centerpiece is captured by the 2 side rails and can slide back and forth. And to help it slide more freely, I apply some paste wax to the rabbets, being careful not to get wax on the bottom of the strips because I'm going to glue them to the vacuum box later on. Now we're ready to attach it all to the box. I start off by marking lines where the bottom rail should be, and then I glue and brad nail it to the box. Keep an eye out for glue squeeze out here and clean it up as quickly as possible. Otherwise, it'll either glue your centre part in place or it'll prevent it from sliding where the dried glue is. With the first rail in place, we can check that the centre piece slides nicely and use it to help position the top rail. Again, just gluing and brad nailing the top rail onto the box. Now on the front side of the vent, one of the hinges stops the centre part from coming out, but it can freely come out on the other end, so we're going to make a stop for it. So grabbing the offcut of the centre strip, I drill a small countersunk hole, and then I take it over to the chop saw and I cut a small 20mm or 3/4 of an inch slice. I can then pop it in the back between the two rails and screw it in, and this will allow me to remove it in future if I need to. I had a spare knob lying around that I attached to the centre strip, and now the vacuum vent thing is done. Remember how we drilled a big hole for the power plug, but we don't want to leave it that big? Well, it's time to fix that. I start off by cutting 2 strips of 7mm or 1/4 inch ply so that together they make a square that's about 40mm or 1.5 inches bigger than the diameter of the hole. I then take the 2 pieces over to the drill press and, using a clamp to keep them together, I drill a hole in the centre that's slightly larger than the diameter of the power cable. And after switching to a countersinking bit, I drill a hole in each corner of the effective square. Now for a quick test fit to ensure the hole is covered and the power cable can fit through the small hole. We are so close to being able to attach this puppy to the router table, but we do need to attach the dust port to the bottom first. The dust port I purchased doesn't have any pre-drilled screw holes, so I had to drill my own, and I wasn't too precious about measuring them out or anything, as you're never going to see them. Having said that, I did use a square to ensure the port was parallel to the edge of the board, because I'm not that much of a heathen. One more feature I wanted to add to the router table is a magnetic safety switch. But because different countries have different regulations with regards to electrical appliances, I figured it best not to show you exactly how to wire this up, but I'd go through the setup of how it works. So basically, we've just got a power cable that plugs into a regular outlet, and that goes to our switch, and then the power goes from our switch to another outlet, and then the router can plug directly into that plug there. Now for demonstration reasons, I'm going to use a lamp to represent the router at this point, and let's see how it works. As you can see, we can lift the lid and just press the on button, and then we can just push the red button to turn it off again. But the real cool thing, or the safety feature here, is once it's on, if there's a power cut, and I'll simulate a power cut by turning the power off at the wall here, obviously the light goes off, but now I'm going to turn the power back on, and you'll notice that the light has not come back on again. You actually have to go and turn it on. And that's pretty important when you're dealing with power tools. You don't want them to be left on in a power cut. So that's why I've chosen to do that. We're there. It's finally time to attach the box to the router table. Or so I thought. So I'm just about to attach the vacuum box onto the bottom of the router table, and I've noticed one somewhat annoying mistake. You'll see here I have the door fairly flush with the top of the box, but if you look at the underside of my table, there's a lip here, and basically the door hits the lip. So I'm going to go and take the door off and take a shim off the top there so I can open it properly. Luckily, it was as easy as unscrewing the door and running it through the table saw. And there we go, little lip there. That will clear this lip on the table. Now getting back to actually attaching the box, this went way easier than I expected. I was concerned about how I was going to hold the box in place and screw it in at the same time. I had decided to use clamps to try and hold it in place, but I wasn't sure I could get them in the right place to hold it correctly. Turns out all my worries were for naught, as the clamps held the box fine, and with the pocket holes pre-drilled I could easily screw the box in place. Going back again to the power plug, I can finally feed it through the hole and then attach our hole covering plate with a few small wood screws. The last thing we need to do is attach the dust collection pipes, and if you've been paying attention you'll remember that I have two dust ports, one on the fence and one on the box. And that's why I need this Y-joiner to combine the pipes from those two ports. Then I can attach the small pipe to the dust port on the fence and the large pipe to the dust port under the box, and we're good to go. Well, that's it for the Router Table series. I hope you enjoyed it and maybe learnt something. And hopefully I can learn something from you. If you've got some good safety tips on best practices for router tables, put them in the comments below. I'd love to hear them. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel, and I'll see you in the next video.